Folks, this is Maria, and I wanted to talk to you a little bit about how to set up the graph that you'll want to be able to use in class the next time we see you. First things first, this is going to be one of those ones where, again, you're going to need to use Excel. The reason why for this one, rather than Google Sheets isn't great with trend lines, and we're using a trend line in this particular one. So please, feel free to ask your teacher. If you don't have Excel on your computer, that is going to be something that you really need for this particular one. So, warning on that. I'm going to show you, instead of with magnesium oxide, I'm going to show you with aluminum oxide. So I am doing something very similar, but it's not quite the same. So just something to think about when going through. All right. When we're going through and we're setting this particular one up, we're going to want to make sure that you make sure everything's labeled is what I'm going to say. If you didn't copy over the column header, I would strongly recommend doing so, or just putting it in now. That would be fine too. Do also make sure you're doing your classes. All of you are in classes where your teacher is at least teaching one other section. So please make sure that you are doing the correct period. If you're in A period, you should be doing A periods. If you're in D period, D periods, C periods, C periods, etc. So when going through, the first thing that I'm going to do is you don't actually get that much information out of the mass of each of these, but you do get this information out of the moles. So that's actually what we're going to do. I'm going to show you a really quick and easy way to do it, because calculating the moles for each of these is a little annoying, and it's easier to make Excel do it for you. So I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to put the equal sign here. That's a really important part. And I'm going to take the information I have in cell B4, and you do have to copy over the one when going through, but you just follow essentially the information that's given to you here, where B and 4. Okay. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to convert it into moles by dividing by the molar mass of aluminum. So remember, yours is magnesium, so you'll have to look up the magnesium, but for aluminum, that's this. Okay, great. Now I have the moles of aluminum. The next thing I'm going to do is, if you see this little black cross that kind of appears over the bottom right-hand corner, I'm actually just going to drag, I'm going to click, and then without releasing, I'm just going to drag to the bottom of the data that I have. Aha. And so now it has calculated all those moles of aluminum for me. Wonderful. Next thing I'm going to do, I'm going to do the same exact thing, but for oxygen. Again, making sure that I'm getting the correct cell value, because if you have the incorrect cell value, it's going to be a problem. And then dividing by the molar mass for oxygen, which I just get from the periodic table. Because oxygen is part of a compound, you don't have to worry about whether oxygen is O2 or not O2 in this one. It's part of an ionic compound, so therefore I'm just looking at how much oxygen when going through. Okay, same thing, and same thing again. Wonderful. Okay, next thing that I'm going to do is, of course, I want to make a graph. So I am going to go ahead and I'm going to select these two columns. I do not want to graph the masses. I want to graph the moles. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to then go to Insert. And then if I go over to the charts, I'm going to pick the Insert Scatter, and I'm just going to pick this very first one this time. Now, you will see that some things did not label terribly well, and that's okay. So what I want to do is I'm going to go to Add Chart Element, which is at the top here. If it didn't pop up for you, go to Chart Design. If you also happen to have the functionality where there's chart elements here, you can also go from there. But since I showed in the other video how to do it from here, I'm going to show from this one this time. So under Chart Design, you'll have these where it's the axes titles. And so that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to plop in that one. And then I'm going to plop in this one. I would start by doing this before anything else. And the reason why is because it's going to be really important for me to make sure that I am not accidentally calculating the wrong thing in the wrong spot and all that sort of stuff. So just something to be aware of. Okay. Now, if you're like, well, what's where, Maria? That is a totally valid thing. I would suggest looking at your data and looking at any sort of points that you're like, oh, this one's going to be really like noticeable. So if I look for the moles of aluminum, I see that everything is sort of between 0.008 is my lowest, and then my highest value is 0.022. That actually fits perfectly with the x-axis, which makes sense, but it's just always good to check. So that's one of the ways you can check when going through, is just going through by process. I'm going to go ahead and title the bottom, or make the bottom x-axis labeled moles aluminum. And then I'm going to do the same thing for the top. I would assume that, or I know that this is moles. Spin. Okay, great. We can worry about the title later. I'm just going to right now put change title just so that I don't forget to do that. And for this one, because we're only looking at this, you don't need to worry about a legend of any sort. So that's good. The next thing we need to do, though, is we need to add a trend line. Oh, I forgot to show you. If you wanted to double check what is being plotted where, you can do the same sort of thing as before. Under chart design, you can look at select data, and it'll help you a little bit with what's going on where. If I look at the series and then I click edit, it shows me what's being plotted where. Okay, so the X values are the D column. The Y values are the E column. So it makes sense. I've got moles oxygen on the Y-axis, moles aluminum on the X. Okay, so I'll leave you to come up with a proper title. See if you can come up with a good one that references both the moles of aluminum and the moles of oxygen. Something that's helpful and refers to the technique of the lab. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to add a trend line to this particular one. There's a few things that you need to do for the trend line, so pay close attention to this. I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to add a chart element, and then I'm going to go to trend line, and you're going to pick a linear trend line. And then you'll see that it just sort of like plops this dotted line on there. Great. But we need to actually edit this trend line a little bit. So that's what we're going to do. I'm going to click on the trend line itself, and then I'm going to click on format trend, or right click on it, and then I'm going to click on format trend line. And the thing that you need to do is you have to set this intercept to 0. You have to display the equation on the chart. And then you're going to display something that's called the R-squared value on the chart. Now, the R-squared value is mostly just something that kind of tells you how good of a fit this line is to your data points. So I will tell you, 0.7835 is not a great R-squared value. Generally, things that are like above 0.95 are a really good fit. It is highly likely that you as a class are going to get a pretty low R-squared value, and that is totally fine. For example, if you look at this particular point, well, how much is this really fitting this particular trend line? And so that's totally fine. At this point, you are done for today. You will be analyzing this data a little more in class. If you can, I would pose as a challenge, if you were thinking about this, what does the slope of this particular graph mean? So that is what I would challenge you to think about. Literally, what does it mean? What does it represent? It's what over what. So something to think about, and then your teacher will lead you through how to analyze the data from this graph when you come in the next day. All right, well, have a great night, and we'll see you next time you're in class.